Welcome to our deep dive into CISA Module 2. And specifically, today we're looking at IT governance. You've provided us with 25 review questions, and we're going to really break those down to help you not only understand the answers, but also the reasoning behind them.
It's kind of like getting a cheat sheet to this really complex world of organizations trying to figure out how to make good IT decisions,
Yeah,
manage risk, and avoid some serious pitfalls along the way.
exactly. So let's jump right in with the first question. And it deals with the Capability Maturity Model, or CMM for short. This is often described as a maturity ladder. There are 5 levels or rungs on that ladder. And question 1 asks us to actually define CMM. So why is this model so important for us to understand when we're talking about IT governance?
Well, the CMM is important because it really provides a framework for assessing an organization's maturity when it comes to managing its IT processes. It's kind of like a yardstick, you could say, for measuring how well they've got their act together. So at the most basic level, that's level 1. Things are pretty chaotic. Processes are unpredictable. They're reactive.
So if a company's at level 1, that's kind of a red flag.
It could be. Yeah, it could suggest a lack of standardized procedures, which can lead to inefficiencies and definitely increased risk. And as organizations progress up that CMM ladder, they're moving towards more defined, managed, and eventually optimized processes.
Okay, so a journey from chaos to control. Now, question 6 asks us to identify 3 CMM levels in the correct sequence. And the answer is initial, managed, and defined. So what does this tell us about how organizations actually develop their IT processes?
Well, I think that sequence highlights the evolutionary path. So at the initial level, things are ad hoc. Success is often reliant on, individual heroics. Then the managed level, you start to see the introduction of some basic project management techniques, and processes become a little more repeatable.
So they're starting to get a handle on things.
Exactly. And then at the defined level, you see organizations establishing standardized processes, documenting them. It's about creating consistency and reducing reliance on individual knowledge.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, question 20 challenges a common misconception about level 5. So that's the highest level of CMM maturity. It states that even at level 5, organizations can effectively utilize outsourcing. So why is this an important distinction to make?
Well, a lot of people assume that when you reach level 5, you become rigid and inflexible. But true maturity is about adaptability and continuous improvement. So even if they're outsourcing, a level 5 organization will have really robust processes in place to manage those vendor relationships, ensure quality control, and really integrate those outsourced activities into their overall governance framework.
So it's not about doing everything in-house. It's about having the processes in place to manage any activity regardless of who's doing it. All right, let's shift gears a bit here and talk about business process reengineering, or BPR, which is a pretty radical concept. Question 2 wants us to arrange the steps involved in BPR in the correct order. It's not for the faint of heart.
No, you're absolutely right. BPR is all about fundamentally rethinking and redesigning those core business processes to really achieve some dramatic improvements, whether that's performance or cost, quality service, you name it. And it's not about just tweaking things around the edges. It's about sometimes blowing things up and starting fresh.
So if CMM is about gradual evolution, BPR is like revolution.
Precisely. So the correct sequence of steps in BPR is diagnose, envision, redesign, and then reconstruct. So it starts with understanding what the current process is, what are the shortcomings, and then envisioning that ideal future state, designing that new process, and then actually implementing and stabilizing the change.
That sounds like a massive undertaking. Questions 4 and 11 kind of delve into the strategic considerations for BPR. Question 4 asks what an auditor would be most interested in when they're reviewing a BPR project. What's the key takeaway there?
Well, an auditor, always with their keen eye for risk, would be most concerned about making sure that risk management is considered throughout that BPR process and that the project really aligns with the organization's overall business objectives. Because there's no point in going through a painful transformation if it doesn't contribute to that bigger picture.
That makes a lot of sense. And then question 11 asks us which process would yield the highest potential return if it was targeted for BPR, and why is a non-working process that ideal candidate?
Well, a non-working process is kind of like a clogged artery in your organization. It's hindering the flow of value. So by re-engineering a process that's fundamentally broken, you have the potential to unlock some really significant improvements. It's like removing a major roadblock to efficiency and effectiveness.
Now, before we move on to the next set of questions, I want to pause for a second. And just for our listener who's diving deep into these concepts, What's the one thing, what's the most important thing to keep in mind about BPR?
I would say it's crucial to remember that BPR is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It can be a really powerful tool, but it should be approached cautiously. Organizations need to really assess their readiness for such a radical transformation and make sure they have the leadership, the resources, and the commitment to see it through.
Great advice. Now let's switch gears again and look at a different facet of IT governance, and that is control mechanisms. So question 3 introduces us to two types of controls, discretionary and mandatory. Can you explain the difference between these and why both are important?
Well, discretionary controls allow individuals some flexibility, to make decisions based on their judgment and the specific circumstances. So think of it as giving people on the ground the authority to kind of adapt to unexpected situations or handle unique cases as they come up.
That sounds empowering, but also potentially risky.
Absolutely. It requires a strong culture of accountability and some clear guidelines to make sure that those decisions align with, the organization's objectives and don't create those unintended consequences. Now, mandatory controls, on the other hand, those are non-negotiables. They enforce strict adherence to predefined rules and procedures. Those are your safety nets, your firewalls, your, unbreakable rules.
So it's about finding that right balance between flexibility and control. Now, question 8 tackles records management systems. And it kind of busts the myth that these systems are just like a simple list of data files that need protection. So what's the real value of having a really robust records management system?
Yeah, a records management system is much more sophisticated than just a simple file catalog. It's about establishing clear rules and processes for handling data throughout its entire life cycle,
Wait.
from creation and storage to retrieval and even disposal.
So it's about making sure the data is managed securely and consistently, no matter who's accessing it or what they're doing with it.
Exactly. This includes defining who's responsible for creating and maintaining those records, how long they need to be kept, and how they should be protected from, unauthorized access or modification.
Now, question 15 brings up employee monitoring, which is always a topic that sparks some debate. It asks about the purpose of tools like drug screenings and background checks. Is it just simply about preventing lawbreaking?
Well, while compliance with the law is obviously essential, the primary purpose of these tools is to establish that baseline of trust and mitigate risks associated with employee behavior. It's about understanding who you're entrusting with sensitive information and systems and monitoring for any changes that could, indicate a potential threat.
So it's about having that proactive approach to security rather than just reacting after something goes wrong.
Exactly.
Question 18 really emphasizes the importance of change control, which, might seem like a very IT-specific issue. So why is change control so crucial from a governance perspective?
Well, change control is all about ensuring that any modifications to systems or processes are made in a controlled and authorized manner. It's about preventing unauthorized changes that could introduce vulnerabilities or disrupt critical operations.
So it's not just about preventing things from breaking. It's about making sure that any changes are made thoughtfully and with the proper oversight.
Precisely. Think of it as having a system of checks and balances to ensure that changes are evaluated for their potential impact, approved by the appropriate stakeholders, and implemented in a way that minimizes risk. It's a vital part of maintaining a stable and secure IT environment.
Now let's talk about strategy. Question 7 distinguishes between that short-term and long-term strategic focus. So why does the question emphasize the next 3 to 5 years when it's defining an organization's strategy?
Well, an organization's strategy needs to be both visionary and pragmatic. So while a long-term vision provides direction, that 3 to 5 year time frame is where the rubber meets the road.
It's where those big picture goals get translated into concrete action plans.
Exactly. It's about making choices about where to invest resources, what initiatives to prioritize, and how to align IT activities with those strategic objectives.
Question 21 digs a little deeper into what strategy really means. It highlights that it's not just about procedures or techniques, but about defining the organization's core business for the next few years. So why is that distinction so important?
Strategy is about making choices. It's about deciding what you're going to be great at, and equally important, what you're going to say no to. It's about focusing your efforts on the activities that will have the most significant impact on achieving your desired future state.
So it's about having that clear sense of purpose and direction. Now, when it comes to measuring the success of a strategy, question 12 introduces the balanced scorecard. So what's the thinking behind this tool and why is it particularly relevant to IT governance?
Well, The Balanced Scorecard, or BSC, moves beyond those traditional financial metrics to provide a more holistic view of organizational performance. It considers perspectives like customer satisfaction, internal processes, and learning and growth in addition to that financial bottom line.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And for IT governance, the BSC is particularly valuable because it helps align IT activities with those broader strategic goals. It's about making sure that IT is not just a cost center, but a strategic enabler of business success.
Now, question 23 reminds us that even best-laid plans can go awry. It points out that BSC implementations can fail, and the reasons often lie with people and politics rather than the tool itself. So what are some common pitfalls to watch out for?
Well, one of the biggest pitfalls is lack of buy-in from top management. If the leadership team isn't fully committed to the BSC approach, it's unlikely to succeed. Another common challenge is inadequate training and communication. People need to understand how the BSC works, how their work contributes to the overall goals, and how their performance will be measured.
So it's not just about having a fancy tool. It's about getting everyone on board and making sure they understand how to use it effectively.
Absolutely. And of course, there's always the potential for internal politics to kind of derail a BSC implementation. Departmental heads might resist changes that threaten their power or turf, or individuals might try to game the system to make themselves look good.
It's a good reminder that even the most well-intentioned initiatives can be undermined by human behavior. Now, question 24 introduces the somewhat ominous concept of shadow organizations. What are these, and why should we be concerned about them from a governance perspective?
Shadow organizations are groups or individuals within an organization that operate outside of those established governance structures. They might duplicate efforts, create conflicting priorities, or even undermine official policies and procedures.
So it's like having a rogue team operating under the radar.
In a way, yes. The presence of shadow organizations can indicate a lack of trust in the formal organizational structure or a failure to adequately address the needs of certain groups or departments. And it can also create significant risks as activities undertaken by these shadow groups might not be subject to the same level of oversight and control as official initiatives.
That sounds like a recipe for trouble. Now let's delve into the world of roles and responsibilities. Question 13 highlights the benefits of a mature project management office, or PMO. It asks which is not an advantage of having a PMO, and the answer is independent projects. So why is this the case?
A mature PMO acts as a centralizing force, bringing order and consistency to project management across the organization. They provide standardized methodologies, tools, and templates, ensuring that projects are aligned with strategic objectives and managed in a consistent manner. They also facilitate collaboration and communication among project teams, reducing the likelihood of conflicting priorities and duplicated efforts.
So a PMO helps ensure that everyone is playing from the same sheet of music.
Exactly, and that's why independent projects are not seen as an advantage of having a PMO. The PMO's role is to bring projects under a common umbrella, ensuring consistency, coordination, and alignment with overall strategic goals.
Question 25 shifts the focus to the steering committee, which plays a critical role in IT governance. So what is their primary function and why is it so important?
Well, the steering committee provides that high-level oversight and guidance, making sure that IT initiatives align with the organization's strategic objectives. So they review proposals, allocate resources, monitor progress. They're really acting as a bridge between IT and the executive leadership.
So they're kind of like the board of directors for IT, making sure everything is on track and serving the greater good of the organization.
That's a good analogy, yeah. And the question also highlights the importance of having a formal charter for the steering committee. So why would the absence of such a charter indicate a lack of control?
Well, a charter clearly defines the committee's roles, responsibilities, and authority. Without it, their decisions might lack legitimacy, and there's a greater risk of them overstepping boundaries or operating without proper accountability.
Precisely. Yeah, it's like trying to sail a ship without a rudder. You might move, but you're unlikely to reach your destination. Now, question 17 takes us into the world of chargeback models, which can be a bit of a minefield. It asks which model is most susceptible to abuse related to, separation of duties or exceeding authority. What's the answer, and why is this particular model so risky?
The answer is the chargeback model. And while it seems straightforward on the surface, IT services are charged back to the departments that are using them, things can get a little tricky when it comes to allocating those costs and determining who's responsible for what. And without clear guidelines and robust controls in place, it's easy for departments to manipulate costs or even shift blame.
It's like a game of hot potato with everyone trying to avoid being stuck with the bill. And this lack of accountability can create conflicts, undermine trust, and lead to some really poor decision making.
So even something as seemingly mundane as IT budgeting can become a governance nightmare if not handled properly. Let's tackle a few remaining questions here that highlight some key concepts and tools. Question 5 focuses on benchmark processes in BPR. Can you walk us through the steps involved and explain why this benchmarking is so important?
Sure. Benchmarking is all about learning from the best. It involves identifying those best practices in other organizations and adapting them to your own context. So the steps involved are plan, research, observe, analyze, adapt, and improve.
So it's not about blindly copying what others are doing. It's about understanding what works well and figuring out how to apply those lessons to your own situation.
Exactly. And in the context of BPR, benchmarking helps ensure that your redesigned processes are not just different, but actually better.
Now, question 9 asks about the primary technique for reporting compliance with key operational requirements. And the answer is the COBIT performance framework. So why is COBIT so valuable in this regard?
COBIT provides a standardized framework for IT governance and management, and it encompasses a wide range of processes and controls. It helps organizations align their IT activities with their business goals, manage risks effectively, and demonstrate compliance with those relevant regulations and standards.
So it's like a comprehensive guidebook for good IT governance, providing a common language and a set of best practices.
You got it.
Question 22 reminds us that even with the best intentions and frameworks in place, control failures can still happen, and it lists several potential failures. What's the common thread running through these examples?
Well, the common thread is a breakdown in communication, oversight, or adherence to those established procedures. So whether it's, failing to detect violations of a policy, modifying a procedure without proper authorization, or granting excessive access privileges, these failures highlight the importance of vigilance, clear accountability, and a real commitment to following those established processes.
It's like having a security system, but forgetting to set the alarm. The tools and the procedures are only effective if they're used consistently and correctly.
Right.
Question 19 highlights a tool that can be helpful when you're navigating the complexities of BPR, and that's precedence diagram analysis. What is this tool, and how does it help manage BPR projects?
Precedence diagram analysis, sometimes called a network diagram, is basically a visual representation of all the tasks involved in a project and the dependencies between them, and it helps project managers identify that critical path, which is the sequence of tasks that determines the overall project duration.
So it's like a map, showing you the most efficient route to completing the project.
Exactly. By understanding those dependencies, project managers can prioritize tasks, allocate resources effectively, and anticipate potential bottlenecks. So it's a valuable tool for keeping those BPR projects on track and minimizing delays.
Question 14 throws a few potential BPR risks our way, specifically those that are likely to occur during the design phase. So why is this particular phase so susceptible to scope risk, skill risk, and political risk?
Well, the design phase is where the rubber meets the road. It's when those abstract ideas get translated into concrete plans, and this is where those three types of risk can really rear their heads. So scope risk arises from the tendency for projects to kind of expand beyond their initial boundaries, often because of a lack of clear objectives or changing requirements. Skill risk relates to having the right expertise on your team to design effective and efficient processes. And then political risk stems from the inevitable pushback and resistance that comes with any significant organizational change.
So it's a phase that requires strong leadership, clear communication, and a willingness to navigate some complex challenges.
Absolutely. Now, question 10 dives into different BPR strategies, and it asks which strategy is used in business process reengineering with an incremental approach. So why is the bottom-up strategy well suited for this incremental approach?
Well, the bottom-up strategy focuses on making gradual improvements to those existing processes rather than attempting a complete overhaul from the top down. So it's a more cautious approach, often preferred by organizations that are a little wary of radical change or, they lack the resources for a larger scale BPR initiative.
It's about making small, incremental changes that can be tested and refined over time, building momentum and buy-in along the way.
Our final question, number 16, brings us back to records management systems. It states that a records management system is not necessary for evidence of proper record keeping. Why is this statement false?
Well, simply keeping records might provide some evidence of activity, but it doesn't guarantee that those records are accurate, complete, reliable, or accessible when needed. A records management system provides that framework and the controls to ensure that records are created, stored, and managed in a way that meets those legal, regulatory, and operational requirements.
So it's not just about having records. It's about having a system in place to ensure that those records are trustworthy and serve their intended purpose.
Exactly. It's about establishing a systematic and auditable approach to record keeping, which is essential for demonstrating compliance, mitigating risks, and making informed decisions.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. From CM and BPR to control mechanisms and strategic alignment, we've explored a wide range of concepts and tools that are really critical for effective IT governance.
And we've tackled some challenging questions that force us to think critically about the complexities and nuances of this ever-evolving field.
For our listener who's been on this deep dive with us, what's the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think the key takeaway is that IT governance is not just a set of rules and procedures, it's a mindset, a culture of accountability, and a commitment to using technology responsibly and effectively to achieve those business objectives.
It's about finding that sweet spot between control and flexibility, empowering people while also ensuring that decisions are made in the best interests of the organization.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing journey, not a destination. As technology continues to evolve at a rapid pace, our approaches to IT governance need to adapt and evolve as well.
So the final thought we'll leave you with is this. Stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo when it comes to IT governance. Because in the end, it's about making sure that technology serves us, not the other way around.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.